Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Creepy Camping Experience by Yeehaw Batman. My friend Julia is with me as I'm typing this out because we just got back from a camping trip where we experienced the scariest thing either of us has ever experienced. Julia and I are both women in our early 20s, and we were out camping in a remote area of Montana that isn't super popular, but it is still fairly popular amongst locals who camp a lot like we do. That meant it wasn't super unusual when we saw a group of 3 guys who looked to be a little older than us drive past our camp about an hour after we set up our chairs and table. We just assumed that they were searching for a good spot to camp. But then, when the car was still in our sights through the trees, we saw it turn around, and as it was driving back, we both noticed that one of the guys was sticking his phone out of the window and seemed to be recording us. Both of us thought it was really weird, and I walked a bit closer to take a picture of their license plate as a safety measure. But when I got closer, I saw that the back plate had all the numbers covered with black paint. Julie and I both got bad vibes from this, but both of us are aware that men are creeps towards women all the time, and both of us were prepared with bear spray because Montana is grizzly bear country. We decided it wasn't a weird enough interaction to pack our stuff and find a different spot, so we just decided to put up an empty tent outside and sleep in my car instead, to trick people into thinking we were sleeping in the tent if they tried to attack us. Later that night, when both of us were asleep in my car, we heard branches rustling and snapping outside by the empty tent, despite the fact that it wasn't windy. Originally, we assumed it was a bear trying to climb up to the bear hang with our food and scented hygiene products. Then we heard male voices outside, and I lifted my head up to the window of the car and saw the same car that had passed us earlier. I got off the air mattress on the top of the back row of seats that we had put down to make an area for us to sleep, and I locked the doors individually so my car wouldn't make a beeping noise. Julia and I stayed still and hoped that the men would leave. For a while we heard them talking, but it was hard to make out what they were saying from inside the car. We heard more rustling and branches snapping, which made us think they were trying to steal something from the bear hang, which was weird, but neither of us wanted to actually look out the window in case one of them spotted us. Eventually, we heard the car leave, which was a huge relief, but we were too freaked out to actually leave the car until it was light outside, and campers nearby would be waking up. When I got out of there, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Above our tent, the men had hung a dead deer that was obviously killed recently because it was leaking blood everywhere on top of our tent. The internal organs had been ripped out, and its limbs were cut off and laid out in a circle around the tent. I mean, this is messed up on its own. But hunting permits weren't even being sold at that time, which means that the deer was killed illegally to do whatever it is that those guys did. As soon as we processed what we were looking at, Julia and I freaked out and drove away without taking down camp. Once we were in cell service, Julia called the police and the Forest Service to report what had happened while I drove home. The Forest Service was nice enough to get our stuff for us, but I didn't even want mine back in case there was some weird curse on it or something. The police are looking into it to charge a fine for killing wild game during the off-season. But as far as I know, what they did to us technically isn't illegal. It's just really creepy. I haven't heard of anything like this before, but if anyone has, let me know. I'm very curious and very spooked. I love camping so much, but after this, I don't know if I'm going to be camping for a long time. They Didn't Steal Anything by Emotional Diet. This is something that happened to me when I was 15. I'm a female. To put things in context, I was living in a pretty big house in a very safe and popular district. The description of the house is important. 5 of us lived there, for starters. My brother, then 17, my sister, also 17, and usually my parents. This settled, the house is as follows. A ground floor with my sister's bedroom, a very large room which gave to the garden by a large patio window and door, a nice room with computers and a TV and some jewelry. Then, if you went up 1 floor, you had the living room, the kitchen, the first bathroom, and my parents' bedroom. And again, a TV in the living room, more jewelry in the bathroom and in my parents' room, and even some money in the drawer, as my father had to pay for some important work on our heating system and planned to pay the guys in cash. Why? Good question, but he might look at me strange if I asked him now. On the 3rd and last floor were my bedroom, my brother's bedroom, the second bathroom, and the sauna. Yeah, it seems a luxury to have that thing, but nearly all the houses have it where we lived back then. And to be honest, we only used it as a wine cave. It was not a dark and stormy night, but it was certainly dark enough. Around 5 p.m. and the world was already black, as it tends to be in the country in winter. My brothers and sisters were not home. They were sharing a class and were consequently still at school. My parents, on the other hand, were in France for some administration issues that they needed to sort out. They hadn't been home for a week. But I was home. And as any self-respecting teenager, I was in my bedroom, the rest of the house in complete darkness. I had my headphones on and was watching a movie in my bed. But there was light in my room, and it's important to note that my windows gave off to the street. A half an hour passed, and then another hour. I was still deep in my movie. I didn't hear any other noises in my house. I didn't hear anything but my movie. But then I lifted my eyes from my screen, and I saw my doorknob turning. It was all very quick. I took off my headphones thinking it was my brother or sister, and the door opened. I was facing an unknown man in my house, standing in my doorway. He was young, 20 or so, and he looked at me, and I looked at him. 2 seconds or so, and then he slammed the door the hardest he could. I was on my feet in seconds, and I was a pretty dumb teenager because I immediately opened the door, only to find 3 men running down the stairs. Unknown men, mind you. So I was frozen in fear for 5 or 10 minutes, and eventually I made my way downstairs too, to the kitchen where I could grab a knife. Slowly, I explored first my parents' room. It was a mess. There were drawers open, papers, clothes, everything everywhere. And there is the money. There was the jewelry. There was the TV, the computer. Nothing had been taken. I proceeded to check out the other parts of the house, calling my brother and sister. They didn't answer. Then I called my best friend who speaks the country's language so she could call the cops for me. Mind you, I didn't speak English at the time. The more I proceeded through the house, the more I found a mess. But nothing had been taken. Absolutely nothing. The guys had gotten in through my sister's window patio door, and there was broken glass everywhere. But in her room, again, nothing taken. The police came with dogs, and we finally did tell our parents after everyone else. But they never found the guys. Being an idiot teenager, I used the opportunity to miss school the following day, although I wasn't really traumatized. More curious than anything. But still, to the robbers who didn't rob us, let's not meet again. It Wasn't My Sister, by Many Damage. I wanted to get some sort of closure for what I experienced when I was younger. So here's my story. For some context, we, my family and I, moved into our current house and the house that this story takes place in when I was like 3 years old. It's a 2-story building that was completed sometime in the early 2000s. There are 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. The master bedroom is to the left of this little walkway at the end of the staircase. Right next to it on the right was the room my younger sister and I used to sleep in when we were younger. And the last room, which was meant to be used as my younger brother's room once he got older, was all the way at the end of the hallway. But that room always remained empty and used as the storage room for the most part. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I had developed this new schedule of after-school procrastination. I would shower and then sit in my parents' bed to watch PBS in my mom's bedroom. She had the biggest TV and by far the better graphics than the other televisions around the house at the time. The TV sat on top of a large drawer chest in front of her bed. My sister, who was a year and a half younger than me, would usually sit with me to watch whatever was playing. We particularly loved when Curious George came on, so we would always be out of the shower and dressed by 3:50 at the latest, considering the show came on at 4. I'd never really felt anything off about the room, at least not when the sun was still out. But I always had this feeling about it once it became dark. It's a feeling I still get to this day as a 20-year-old. I just can't walk by it late at night without getting the heebie-jeebies. Something always felt off about it, especially when I was younger. I hated being upstairs by myself, even during the daytime. However, this one day, for whatever reason, I was up there by myself. It was sometime in the fall, and as a result they were playing an hour-long special for Curious George. I honestly can't remember whether it was Halloween or Thanksgiving, but it was a movie sort of special. All I know is that I loved it enough to sit up there by myself and watch it alone. But I was at least a good 15 to 20 minutes in, when I heard a noise from outside in the hallway. I figured it was my sister, so I ignored it. At some point, my sister came in and proceeded to stand right in front of the TV. My sister had this annoying habit of standing in front of any big screen and blocking the view for everyone else. And while she wasn't really blocking my view, I knew that my mom hated it when she just stood there. She said it was rude or something along those lines. Although in that particular moment, I didn't care. There had been this scene that was really funny that my sister had missed a part of, only getting to watch the other half. I began to tell her what had happened before, proceeding to laugh and expecting her to laugh too. But I didn't get a response, which annoyed me a bit, so I proceeded to say the same thing again. I still didn't get a response from her. She stood still, glancing at the TV, and away from me. Because I was on my mom's bed and the TV was right in front of me, all I could see was her back. And the third time I got no response, I grew irritated, and I yelled her name and told her to stop ignoring me, to look at me. That's when she turned around. Except it wasn't my sister. I mean, it looked like her, wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing earlier. The same everything. But her eyes were off. All I remember was how unsettling her eyes were, being all pitch black, not to mention the emotionless expression aimed at me. We both stared at each other for a while before this thing turned around and proceeded to walk out of the room. I was still a bit wary, and then I got really angry because I was just blatantly ignored. So I got up and also walked out of the room, and I yelled for my mom, tattling that my sister had just ignored me and left me talking to her like an idiot. My mom's voice was confused as she yelled back that couldn't be possible. My sister had been downstairs with her the whole time. I asked if maybe she had gone upstairs at some point and she just hadn't realized, but my mom said no, and even if she had, she would have heard the squeaking of the floorboards that are right by her room. I was baffled. After that, I didn't feel comfortable being in that room by myself anymore, and instead decided to stay downstairs with my mom for a while. I've experienced other weird things that just can't be explained, but I often think about this one instance and wonder what it was that I talked to that day. If anyone has any ideas or guesses as to what I could have been talking to, let me know. Two Guys in the Hospital Parking Lot by Icy Builder. I'm a 33-year-old female, but this happened back when I was 24. I'm a nurse by profession. At the time, I was working at an outpatient facility, and I was stuck strictly on a night shift at the time. To this day, I still get antsy during the night shift. For those who may not know, outpatient facilities are used for patients that are recovering from surgery. On a typical night, we would have 1 or 2, and it was rare that we had any more than that. I don't remember how many we had on this night, but it was somewhere along those lines. During the night, there were a few things I was required to do and would act upon request if needed. But me and the med tech were usually in the nurse's break room, which was right next to our desk, watching TV or playing on our phones. We also had a security guard. It was an unarmed guard position, which I still have my issues with, and they did less than we did. Our full-time guard was a man who at the time was pushing 70. Don't get me wrong, he was the biggest sweetheart in the world, but if push ever came to shove, I don't know how effective he would have been in the state of a crisis. Our other guard was a part-timer. He only worked 2 to 3 shifts every couple of weeks. My brother used to joke that he was a professional NPC because he worked several different jobs to make ends meet. At the time he was 28, and the nursing staff tended to favor him because he actually did his job properly. One reservation I had about him, though, was that he wasn't always in the security office. He actually conducted his checks and would do a few checks at an adjoining facility, so he wasn't always at his desk. We didn't always need him, but it was nice to have him there in case we needed to go outside. This was one of the nights that he was working, and this was the circumstance. So, this isn't great for a nurse to say, but I used to go out a few times a night to have a sneaky cigarette. I've quit smoking since, but at the time I probably would leave between 4 and 6 times a night to smoke near my car. It was around midnight, give or take, and I was posted up against my car smoking, when these 2 guys started walking through the parking lot. Trespassing here was a big no-no, but the parking lot was a shortcut to a local motel, which is a creepy encounter all on its own. Security usually wouldn't get involved if people were just quickly passing through. The 2 guys spotted me and called out to me. I didn't respond, which seemed to be an invitation for them to approach. I know now that I should have just tossed the cigarette and gone back inside, but 24-year-old me ignored that common sense. Both of the guys were probably in their mid-20s. Nothing off-looking about them. Aside from the way they were talking and the fact that they were going to the motel, they probably wouldn't have stood out in a crowd to me. One of them asked me for a cigarette. I said that I left my pack inside and I couldn't help them. He then started asking me questions about my job, where I was from, and how old I was. I didn't take the bait on any of these questions. I told them I had to get back inside, and one of them sort of stood in my way, and the other asked if he could have my number. I said no. The thing that took me overboard was one of them had moved my jacket to see my name tag, and put his face really close to it to read my name. It was obvious he was just trying to look at my boobs. And that was the line for me, and I pushed past him and foolishly went to the front door that my key card didn't open. So I had literally cornered myself between the door and these 2 random guys. I had to find a way around them to get to the side door that I had exited from, but judging by their body language, that was not going to go my way. Thankfully, I was greeted with a familiar voice. Our friendly neighborhood security guard was apparently checking the other facility and managed to show up in time before I either had to run or plead. One of the guys got smart with him, but after an intense staring contest, the guy backed down and the 2 of them left. I did enjoy the look on his face when he realized that he was actually dealing with someone who could probably cause him some serious harm. I remember giving the security guard a hug and thanking him, and I started looking forward to his shifts. He made us feel a lot safer, and after that he and I would converse, and he would walk outside with me if I wanted to smoke, and we would occasionally split a pizza or something during our shifts that coincided. I know this isn't an incredibly conventional story about the man that would become your husband 3 years later and give you 2 beautiful little girls, but it's a story that reminds me that he's always had my back. To this day, I don't know what those 2 guys' intentions were, and as much as I'd love to believe they wouldn't have tried anything in plain view of security cameras, being a nurse has taught me that people frequently don't think with their heads sometimes. I'm just grateful that divine intervention sent someone in the way of that, and gave me the best guy in the world. Sorry, I didn't mean that to turn sappy. Stay safe, everyone. Truck Driver Toying with Me. No Explanation, by Fruity Dude. In December of 2015, I was making a north-south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my young 20s, driving home for the semester break. I was driving south through Kentucky on I-65 around 11:30 p.m., still about an hour away from the city where I was going to stop for the night. There were no other cars on the road at all, and I hadn't seen any for quite a while. That part of I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes for each direction, in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park, and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing and clicked off the phone and waited for the truck to pass. The truck got right even with my car and instead of completing the pass, matched my speed and stayed beside me. Then the driver turned on a spotlight on the side of the truck which shone directly down into the cabin of my car and on my face. I was really confused. I'd never seen a truck do anything like that before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed like a very long minute, and I was getting creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead, and I slowed my speed so that the truck would finish passing me. The driver turned off the light and completed the pass, moving from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was creeped out by this, slowed down some more, and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and the ring. As soon as I moved into the leftmost lane, the truck matched my speed again and moved over to the middle lane to become parallel with my car. The driver turned on a light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I now confirmed that this truck driver was definitely following me and definitely being super creepy. Again, I kept my gaze straight ahead because I felt like looking over would somehow make it worse. The truck turned off the spotlight and pulled in front of my car in the leftmost lane, and I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up. I was probably going right around the speed limit again, 70 or 75. By the time I completed my merge, I saw the truck beginning to shift lanes towards me again and speeding up to match me. Before it could pull up next to me again, I decided it was time to get out of there, and I floored it. I sped up to around 90, the fastest I had ever driven in my life, and I put maybe a mile of distance between me and the truck before slowing down some. I looked up to the rearview mirror, and I will never forget the image I saw. The big orange tractor trailer illuminated by the street lamps of a highway interchange, obviously devouring the distance I had put between us, was behind me. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed, so I sped up again, but it didn't matter. The truck caught up to me, pulled beside me again, and turned on the spotlight again. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed, not daring to look over. It was at that time that I decided my only advantage was the maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind the truck. They moved over into the right lane, and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind the truck in its blind spot so they couldn't see me. I saw a sign for an exit and decided this is how I would escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we came up onto the exit, and I waited until the last possible moment, once the truck body was beyond the point where the exit split away. I darted out from behind the truck and made it onto the exit. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far from the interstate I should go and if the truck would come looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right by the interstate, and I parked and got out. I inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage, thinking maybe the driver was trying to warn me of something wrong with my car. And there was nothing wrong with it. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was long gone before getting back on the interstate and continuing to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I did not use I-65. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the stories. I'll get back to you as soon as I can in those comments. Follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description. And of course, if you'd like to take your support a step further, there's a link to my Patreon page as well as my storefront at tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Show it off. The chicks love it. Thanks to everybody who stuck around in the last episode to hear the band Swill from Buffalo, New York. I love the comments, and I have passed those along to the band. I know it pisses some people off that I share tunes at the end of episodes sometimes, but to those who dig it, I will keep on doing it. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.